Welcome to episode 84 of Talking Dairy, brought to you by DairyNZ. I'm your host Jack McGowan, and today we're talking about what the milking frequency data from the 2023-24 season tells us about how it's being used and the differences between the regions. Joining me today is Paul Edwards, Senior Scientist at DairyNZ, who will be sharing insights from the latest season's data, and Kent Weston-Arnold, Area Manager at DairyNZ. He's here to share insights from some farmers in his area who have been putting once-a-day milking and early lactation into practice. Depending on where you are in the country at the time of this going live, you could be near the tail end of calving or just reaching the peak. So if you've been wondering if it's the right fit for your calving system to help reduce the load next season, stay tuned to find out more. Tēnā korua, thanks for joining us today, Kent and Paul. Before we get into the topic of milking frequency, let's hear a little bit about each of you. Going to start with you, Kent. Tell us a little about yourself and how you came to your role at DairyNZ.
Hi, Jack. Yeah, I'm an area manager. I work running events and working with farmers in the North-West Waikato. I've got quite a diverse background. We've been 50-50 share milking, quite large scale. Grew up on a dairy farm in Tokoroa. After university, ended up working overseas quite a bit. I've worked on dairy development projects in Pakistan and Myanmar, and also commercial operations in Chile.
Thank you, Kent. And Paul, we've had you on the podcast before, and I know your dairy roots run deep and international as well. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my family dairy farming in Northland. We've got 3 farms up there, about 850 cows in total across them. Just ticked over 15 years at DairyNZ, actually. Been in the science team for that whole time, but I guess I've had a number of different focuses over that time and roles, and done my PhD through that, which included a year in Ireland, as you alluded to. Yeah, so based down in our Canterbury office.
Thank you, Paul. As you said, you've had a number of different focuses through your 15 years here. One of those is milking frequency. How did you end up focusing on milking frequency?
It's always been an interest of mine, particularly from that family experience. We adopted full season once-a-day milking on one of our farms back in the 2005 season, so just about coming up for 20 years. And so, yeah, I guess it's always been an interest of mine, and yeah, been fortunate enough to have had the opportunity to actually do some research in this space as well.
So, Paul, you've been looking at the data from the 23-24 season. What trends are emerging in milking frequency across the different regions? And is there anything surprising that you've noticed?
I guess a big thank you to Fonterra for being able to share some of these insights. So the rollout of their milk vat monitoring system has given us some sort of a very rich picture of what's happening out there across the sector. Just been delving into the 23-24 stats, so just finished last season, and across the board, actually the use of different milking frequencies has been relatively consistent across the last 3 seasons. It was a bit of a difference in the 22-23 season, where there was a bit more use of full season twice a day. I suspect driven by good summer conditions in the North Island in that year. But if we look specifically at 23-24, there was about 12% of farms were using either full season once a day or flexible milking and once a day. So I guess essentially no use of twice a day at all. It was about a third of farms were using once a day at some stage of the lactation, and about a fifth of farms using flexible milking at some stage of lactation. And there's a bit of an overlap there where some farmers, of course, use once a day and flexible milking, and then that left about 40% that were full season twice a day. I guess I should point out that in terms of classification there, in order to be kind of categorised as having used a milking frequency, I drew an arbitrary boundary around that they needed to have used that milking frequency for at least 4 weeks. So it's not just like they've used it for a very short period of time. And that did exclude split calving herds, because when you're looking at the VAT, you don't necessarily get the insights. Of course, they could have 2 different herds at different milking frequencies over that time. I guess if we look forward to when in the season those different milking frequencies are being used, it's pretty clear that people really start to switch at about 50% of the way through the season. There's a clear kind of divergence at that point. But interestingly, this data does give us the first kind of real insight into early season use of once a day. And so as a national kind of statistic, is about 15% of herds using once a day over that spring period for some length of time. Obviously, all sorts of variation there. And that is limited to spring calving herds for that statistic.
From your perspective, Paul, what factors are driving the adoption of once-a-day milking in that early lactation and across the season?
I guess there's a whole host of different reasons people might be interested in different milking frequencies. Typically, they relate to animal-related things. So, for example, body condition score, or looking to improve that. It could be feed-related things, for example, low pasture covers, or people-related things. So, really taking the pressure off at a busy time of the year, particularly calving and that mating period in spring. It's a stressful time on farm. And so, I guess whatever your driver is there, the combination of those things will I guess, influence what option might be best suited to an individual farm.
Okay, so Paul, you've talked about it at a national level, what you could see in the Fonterra VAT data. What did you see as differences between the regions?
There's definitely considerable regional variation in the use of different milking frequencies, from kind of one end of the spectrum where in Northland in the last season, over 40% of herds were full season once a day. The rest of the North Island, relatively speaking, was quite similar, but with about 40 to 50% being full season twice a day. But there's definitely some regional nuances there. The top of the South Island, so Tasman, Marlborough, very diverse use of different milking frequencies up there, and actually the lowest use of full season twice a day. So only 15% of farms using full season twice a day, which is even lower than Northland. And then the lower South Island, so Canterbury, Otago, Southland, doing relatively similar things there with significant use of flexible milking approaches like milking 3 times in 2 days, 10 and 7, things like that. Over 40% of herds there using one of those alternative milking frequencies during the season, with a similar use of full season twice a day to those North Island regions. Similar switch points, reasonably consistent at about that 40 to 50% of the way through the season is when people start doing different things. The really interesting one, that this is the first time we've been able to look at that, is the considerable use of early lactation once a day milking in Canterbury, Otago, Southland, where about 20 to 30% of herds are using once a day milking in early season.
And is that a new trend?
Yeah, it's definitely increasing, but we've only had this kind of rich picture for about the last 3 seasons, so it's hard to discern a trend over that sort of short period of time. And I guess if I almost spill the beans a little bit in terms of giving a summary of what once a day in particular, what effect that might have on those kind of 3 categories, just at a very high level, I guess we do see that once a day improves energy balance. And that because of that, it can have an impact on body condition score and reproductive performance, but that is highly dependent on the length of time that once a day period is used for. And that likely there is some substitution there where that to have got that increased body condition score, there is a trade-off with milk solids. But again, the extent of that is dependent on how it's being used. From that feed perspective, once a day doesn't conserve feed, but it does mitigate negative energy balance. So there is a positive side to that story. And then from a people perspective, I guess we do see that it does free up people's time and increases flexibility. So for example, during spring, you could actually be milking your cows in the afternoon, which leaves you sort of free to do all of your calving related tasks in the morning and take that pressure out of getting everything done kind of in that morning period. And there's some evidence out there about the effect it might have on sleep. And so, being able to reduce stress and fatigue over that period, there really should be benefits there from a kind of people perspective, which then could play out in terms of actually helping out farm performance as well, depending on how it's being used on farm.
Now to you, Kent, there's a pocket of farmers in the Waikato that have been milking once a day in early lactation for many years. So you've had a chat with a few farmers who've implemented once a day milking already this season in early lactation. What have been some of the most common reasons they've given you for why they decided to try once a day in early lactation?
In terms of trying it, there was quite diverse reasons. One, he was looking for a solution to try and improve mating performance. Another was a farmer with a contract milker on board, basically a one-man operation, milking 250 cows. So he was looking to take pressure off the one guy who was doing everything and just make his life a little bit easier in that early stage when things are under pressure. One of the other farmers, they went on to once a day because they'd had a death in the family at that time, and they were having a lot of relief staff and were wanting to take pressure off through that period. And it worked so well that they decided to really kick on with it because they could see the range of other benefits that came from it.
Can you give us some specific examples of how milking once a day and early lactation impacted their operations?
So, for example, the farmer that was looking to improve his mating, he actually got a registered body condition scorer in that season to get a gauge on how much body condition they lost immediately after calving. He believes that they halved their condition score loss. They used less seeders that first year. They had a better 3-week submission rate, reduced empty rate. And one of the things that really surprised him was that they actually had an improved cell count, which you may seem counterintuitive, but he puts it down to less stress on the animals, less walking, more relaxed. And then on top of that came the people benefits. So all the farmers I talk to are operating on 24-hour grazing. So less time putting up fences, less time for the cows walking to and from the sheds. That particular farm that was looking to improve his mating, they had a walk of over 3 Ks at times, and that really took pressure off the herd during that early lactation.
Now, Kent, you mentioned yesterday one of the farmers you spoke to had tried it this season and wasn't sure that it suited them. Tell us more about that.
I know one farmer that gave it a crack last season. The most obvious negative of going once a day in early lactation is that there is going to be a compromise in milk production. And he found in that early lactation period, he felt he'd dropped about 1,500 kilos of solids over that month. And with any changes to your farm system, it's all about what's going to work for you and what's going to fit for your farm, your business, your people, your goals and aspirations. And for him, potential long-term benefits in terms of body condition score and later lactation and mating results didn't outweigh that 1,500 kilos of solids. So this year he went back on to twice a day as soon as the milk was at the stirrer.
Thank you, Kent. So, Paul, you would know more about the science of once-a-day milking and the influence on milk production in the short and long term. What should farmers be aware of?
The easiest way to answer that is to look back at a couple of experiments that have investigated that question. We'll talk about 3. The first one was a study done in 2009-10 at DairyNZ's live farm in Newstead. And this one had a comparison between twice a day for that period or either 3 or 6 weeks of once a day milking. As important context for this particular study, that there was no feed restriction. These cows were being fed generously, leaving 1,800 kilo residuals. They were getting some supplement in the shed. So this is, I guess, a bit of a kind of worst case scenario in terms of what production loss could be expected. If we look at what the results of that one were, so they all lost a similar rate of body condition score at the start, but by 6 weeks after calving, cows that had been milked once a day, whether it be 3 or 6 weeks, had a greater body condition score. And interestingly, that was carried through the majority of the season, although they did actually end up drying off at similar body condition score. In terms of that milk production, for 3 weeks of once a day, there was a 7% decrease in the annual milk solids, and for 6 weeks, the number was 12%. But I guess it's important to keep in mind how you go and apply those things. So in this experiment, each cow was managed individually, and every cow had either 3 or 6 weeks, which may be becoming more common with automatic drafting systems and herd management systems, that you could apply that level of management. But for the most part, people choose to milk once a day based on 3 weeks from the planned start of calving. And of course, that means that actually the majority of the cows end up experiencing a lot less than 3 weeks of once a day, if you're using that as an example. And so they used these experimental results and modelled what that approach might do. And so they concluded that for 3 weeks of once a day from the planned start of calving, there'd be about a 1 to 2% decrease in the annual milk solids. And that number was 3 to 5% when using once a day for a period of 6 weeks. So there was another study done in Ireland in the 2018 period at Chuggas and Moorpark. And so they had 4 different treatments, a twice-a-day one and then a once-a-day for either 4, 6 or 8 weeks. And this experiment was run actually as 2 milking groups. So those animals were in the once-a-day group for their set length of period, and then they moved over into the twice-a-day group, and then they were followed through the whole season. Some kind of key results from there. They measured no significant difference in body condition score, but the once-a-day cows were about 20 kilos heavier than the twice-a-day group, and that, again, carried through to the majority of the season. However, there wasn't actually a lot of difference between the length of use of once-a-day, so that 20 kilos was pretty consistent, whether there'd been 4, 6, or 8 weeks of once-a-day. And in terms of production, looking at the annual milk solids, there was a 0.8% decrease per week of milking once a day. So by milking the animals for 1 week of once a day, you could expect a 0.8% decrease on your annual milk solids. That if you were doing 2 weeks, there would be a 1.6% decrease, and so on and so on.
So that is a lower decrease than what we were seeing on the Life Arm study.
Yeah, and that's probably reflective of being more representative of what might be happening on a farm.
And you mentioned earlier something about a sleep study. That sounds interesting.
In terms of what some of those benefits for people are, we don't have any hard data on once-a-day milking. We've got the anecdotal stories that Kent mentioned, and there's studies looking at interviewing people and some of those subjective benefits. In terms of quantifiable things, we have done some work within the Flexible Milking Project looking at 3 and 2, and so we chose sleep as something that we thought we could measure to see if there was a difference. And so this was a pilot study, so keep that in mind. It's relatively small scale. There was 3 farms involved in the study, one that was milking full season 3 and 2, and then 2 neighbouring farms as part of the same corporate farming group that were milking twice a day. And there was 3 people on the farm milking 3 and 2 and 6 spread across the 2 twice-a-day farms. And we had these sleep rings on from about 3 weeks prior to the planned start of calving and monitored their sleep right through till November.
Tell us a bit more about these sleep rings. What are they?
Well, it's called an Aurora sleep ring, and basically you just wear it. I guess it's similar kind of principles to cow wearables ultimately, or your Fitbits that you might be more familiar with, or even your phones these days give you a lot of information about your activity. We ask them to wear them at night, so not throughout the whole day. It can estimate when you're in bed, but then secondly when you're actually asleep. We had these on people prior to the start of calving, and there was actually no difference in sleep between these 2 groups for that period, which I guess is a good thing. It's what we want to see, that when cows aren't being milked, the groups were doing the same thing. And then interestingly, they actually stayed the same, getting the same amount of sleep through till the 3rd week of calving, and then it really started to separate out. And I guess that probably relates to the amount of cows being calved at that point, and milking time starting to get longer, the grind of calving starting to set in. And from that point onwards to the rest of the study, on average, the people working on that farm milking 3 and 2 got nearly half an hour more sleep per night, which, I think half an hour in itself is not something to be sneezed at. But when you actually look at the total amount of sleep these people were getting, once we were getting into calving and it was down at just over 5.5 hours sleep per night, so not a lot, then, an extra half an hour, I would argue, is really quite valuable at that point. And I think that just really feeds back into that story of the potential to reduce fatigue, be in a better mental state to be making better decisions or executing those decisions better, and ultimately that sort of bigger net benefit that we don't measure in an experiment, right, where we apply the same amount of management time and skill to each of the treatments. The only thing different is the milking frequency. Of course, when you go out to a commercial farm, that's not how it plays out, right, because you've now got this extra time that you could be using for other things to improve your farm management. But the 3rd study that has looked at early season use of once a day was in 2010-11 in Taranaki. And so this was a 2x2 experiment. There was 2 levels of feeding, either 100% feeding to requirements or underfeeding, so about 60% of the 100% group, and then cows either being milked once a day or twice a day. And so just for context, that means that the adequately fed group were getting about 14 kilos per cow per day and grazing down to about 1550 residual, whereas the underfed cows were only getting about 8 kilos and they were really grazing hard down to about 1150 kind of residual.
And what time of the season was this?
This is spring. This is 3 weeks at the start of the season, starting from about 5 weeks post-calving. So it's kind of simulating a oh, I'm in a feed deficit period and I don't have supplement up my sleeve to be able to fill that deficit. The results of this experiment that once a day didn't prevent body condition score loss, but if supplement isn't available, then it does reduce the negative energy balance and, reduces risk factors like ketosis and things like that. In terms of milk production, the adequately fed group once a day versus twice a day, there was an 8% decrease in milk over that lactation, which was about equivalent to being underfed in milk twice a day. So looking at the 2 twice a day groups, going from being fully fed to restricted over that 3-week period, there was a 9% decrease in milk solids. So I guess just showing that sort of compounding effect that can exist of underfeeding over that period. Comparing the underfed groups, the once a day was 13% less relative to the 9% for twice a day. So there was a little bit of a further decrease going to once a day, but half as much as if they'd been fully fed, which, Jack, that probably does cycle back to why I said when they were generously fed, that was the worst case scenario in terms of showing the maximum potential difference.
Following on from what Paul said, Kent, when considering once-a-day milking and early lactation, what are the key benefits that farmers in your area have experienced on the people side?
So one of them, for example, and don't get me wrong, he's a very organised farmer as well, but he was out fishing 3 times during July, peak calving, and he's all wrapped up by 10 o'clock in the boat. He has a little ritual with his mates. They go out on their birthday every year. So every year, peak, middle of calving, he's out there with his mates going for a fish. And that sort of thing's just so good for well-being. Anybody who's been through calving knows you're going to bed at night just thinking about a million different things that you got to deal with the next day. He's getting that time to de-stress and get his mind off the farm. All the farmers that I spoke to said that they were in a position where they were making better decisions, which ties in with what Paul was saying. Over that period, pasture walks don't get missed because they've actually created the time to make sure that's happening. They're getting better pasture management because of that, and because of that, they're making better decisions. You're less stressed. But as much as anything, one of those farms has got a team of 4 staff as well as the farm owner, and it just makes life so much easier for everybody. One farmer said that your wife does not necessarily know what time you leave in the morning, but they know what time you get home at night. And so the whole team's home by 4 o'clock, the stress is off. Sure, once they go back on to twice a day, it gets busier again. But benefits for everybody. Like Paul was saying, you got less fatigue. The farmers are all adamant that they've got less health and safety issues, less accidents happening, less risk to the business as a whole.
So, Kent, you talked about the effect on the family and on the farmers themselves of having a bit more time through calving. We haven't talked about one of the largest tasks during the calving period, which is rearing calves. Can you tell us what they shared about that?
All of them were very diligent on harvesting that gold colostrum. One of them actually ranks their colostrum A, B, C, and D and prioritises that with the different stage of the calves. You probably have to be a little bit more organised in terms of managing your colostrum, and one of the downsides is that there might be some need to heat that. But one of the things that surprised me and caught me off guard was a real conviction that calves are getting better fed because on once a day your milk solids percentage is slightly higher. So still feeding the same volume of milk, but at a slightly higher milk solids percentage, these farmers were really confident that their calves were doing better because of that.
So higher milk solids when milked once a day, does that line up with what you've seen in your research, Paul?
Yeah, look, certainly reducing a milking frequency, milk solids composition goes up, which could explain that observation. It also could just be simply that if you've got more time available, that you can pay more attention to each of those calves and make sure that each of them are getting the amount that they need.
Another common hurdle is the perception that my cows produce too much to go on once a day. What does the regional intel tell us about this? Is this perception or is it reality?
Well, from a research perspective, I guess we haven't specifically tried to answer that question, having different levels of production and seeing what impact that might have. But I guess if you reflect back on those regional statistics, the fact that the greatest use of early season once a day is actually in the South Island, and which is also our most productive regions, it seems like farmers in those regions are not feeling like that is a barrier for them using it. So I would query whether it's a valid reason to not consider it. There's, as we've talked through, lots of potential opportunities and challenges that it brings. So it's definitely not something for everyone, but I don't believe that shouldn't necessarily be a barrier to using early season once a day milking.
Anything to add there, Kent?
Well, that ties in quite well with what we're seeing. So one of these particular farms, they're getting up to almost 2 kilos of solids per cow per day on once a day. And then when they go to twice a day, within 10 days, they're doing sort of 2.4. So, they're high producing cows and they're managing well on under once a day conditions.
Thank you. Now, Kent, finally, for farmers that are on the fence about trying once a day and early lactation, what advice would you give to them?
Set a plan and stick to it. And don't focus on the milk docket. You might be seeing that you're sort of a few percent behind last year for the season to date, but it's about more than just the milk production here and now. There's those long-term benefits. Think about how it's going to fit for your system, your farm, and your team. It's not going to be for everybody. But we're seeing some quite consistent benefits across a range of systems, a range of staffing levels. Take circumstances into account. We've had a weekend with some really filthy weather. Up here in the Waikato this last weekend, one of those farmers was planning on going back to twice a day on the Friday before that weekend. He decided to hold off, get through that rough weather patch, take the stress off the girls. And actually, all the farmers I spoke to talked about waiting for a good weather window to make it happen. Think about your application, how you're going to apply it, how it's going to work for your team. If done poorly, you can get poor results. You need to be more accurate with your pasture allocation. If you're on 24-hour grazing, you don't have that second bite of the cherry in the day to get things right. You're not seeing your cows as often, so you need to be quite sharp on it in terms of identifying any potential animal health problems or issues. You need to make sure you've got the feed on hand to feed the animals. All the farmers involved were adamant that you need to be fully feeding your cows. Although we heard that there are benefits from it in a feed pinch, they're not applying this as a means of dealing with a feed pinch. And that should minimise the impact on any reduction on peak and really set you up for later on in the season.
Thank you, Kent. And Paul, back to you. Is there anything farmers should be thinking about if they're going to try milking once a day? What do they need to think about in terms of managing the milk itself?
Yeah, I guess the main thing just to keep in mind is the rules around moving animals in from the colostrum group into the vat. And NZCP1 does state that there is 8 milkings before milk can go into the vat, which, look, we know that there's lots of different approaches out there being used. The one thing I would just be very cautionary on is if you've been using dry cow therapy, to really read the label and make sure that you're following that, or if going off label, that you have got the vet's kind of sign off for that, because that's the last thing you want to be doing is ending up with inhibitory substance grades.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Kent. Thank you both so much for sharing your insights and experience with us and bringing in insights from the farmers around you. It's clear that once-a-day milking and early lactation is a topic with a lot of interest. And while, as you said, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, the trends and stories we've heard today give us a better understanding of how it's being used and the impact it's having for farmers around the country. Whether you're considering once-a-day milking for next season or just curious about how it might fit into your farm system, I hope you found this discussion helpful. And if you want to know more, the DairyNZ website has information to help you make informed decisions, and we've linked some useful resources in the show notes. Mā te wā, mauri ora. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Talking Dairy. Make sure to hit follow so you can keep up to date with our latest episodes. You can also keep up with DairyNZ News on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn, or go to our website and sign up for our fortnightly DairyNZ News emails. As always, if you have any feedback on this podcast or have some ideas for future topics or guests to have on the show, please email us at talkingdairy@dairynz.co.nz. Mā te wā, Mōri ora, catch you next time.